In 2022, satellite images published by the Washington Post revealed what looks like major upgrades to Russia's military biological facility at Sergiev Posad 6 near Moscow, particularly to its high containment laboratories, the kind of labs used for research on the world's most dangerous pathogens. These upgrades began mere months after Russia invaded Ukraine, while simultaneously accusing Ukrainian laboratories of conducting secret biological weapons research. This isn't just coincidence. It's part of a documented pattern that stretches back decades where accusations about biological weapons have been strategically deployed to distract from one's own activities. Today, we'll examine in depth how Russian disinformation tactics have evolved from the Cold War to the digital age. We'll take a close look at Russia's long history of spreading biological disinformation and highlight key differences between the Cold War disinformation campaigns and Russia's contemporary approaches. And at the end of this video, I'll share my go-to resource with you that can help you stay updated about bioweapons disinformation. But before we begin, throughout this video, when I refer to Russia in the context of disinformation campaigns or aggressive actions, I'm specifically addressing Putin and his regime and government officials responsible for these policies, not the many Russian citizens who oppose these actions, advocate for truth, and face significant risks in their pursuit of democracy and justice. Their courage deserves recognition. In war, the truth often is the first victim. But what exactly do we mean when we speak of disinformation? Disinformation refers to false information which is spread with the intent to mislead. It's deliberately deceptive. An example of disinformation would be propaganda. For instance, in the Third Reich, Nazi propaganda targeted the Jewish population by falsely claiming that Jewish people were responsible for the war, using these lies to justify their systemic persecution. You might also have heard the term misinformation. There's one key difference between dis and misinformation. Misinformation is likewise wrong or false information, but the person spreading it doesn't realize it's wrong. They believe it to be true. So think of disinformation as the malicious, calculated cousin of misinformation. Both can cause harm, but disinformation is more sinister because it's weaponized with specific objectives in mind. The bioweapons narrative we'll explore throughout this video falls squarely into this category. With a clear definition of disinformation in mind, let's go back and examine biological weapons disinformation in the past. The roots of these tactics stretch back over 70 years into the Cold War era. And the story really begins in the early 1950s during the Korean War. North Korea, China, and the Soviet Union made allegations that the United States had conducted hundreds of airdrops of disease-carrying insects, including flies, fleas, spiders, and ticks, infected with plague, anthrax, and cholera. Years later, when the Soviet archives were opened, independent experts would demonstrate that these charges were, quote, contrived and fraudulent, and that they did not stand up scientifically or historically. Throughout the Cold War, the Soviet Union refined these tactics into an art form. While publicly supporting the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, an international treaty that still stands today prohibiting the development and production and prosecution of biological weapons, the Soviet Union secretly expanded its biological weapons program to an unprecedented scale, all while accusing other nations of exactly what they were hiding. I covered the Soviet biological weapons program called Bioweapons in another video. I'll add a link to this video in the video description. To be fair, the Soviet Union wasn't the only country during this time working on biological weapons and state-sponsored programs. However, the Soviet bioweapons disinformation campaigns were exceptionally sophisticated. Consider the example of Operation Tarakani in the early 1980s. During this operation, the Soviets claimed that the Pakistan Malaria Research Center was actually a CIA-funded laboratory breeding weaponized mosquitoes to spread disease. American researchers were branded as poisoners from overseas, plotting to infect Afghan cattle. The truth? The Malaria Pakistan Research Center was simply a University of Maryland-supported lab conducting legitimate malaria research. What was the real purpose behind this disinformation campaign? This campaign was a strategic effort to throw doubt on evidence the United States was presenting to the United Nations and the wider public about Soviet use of chemical weapons in Southeast Asia. Another striking example is Operation Denver. In 1985, the Soviet Union launched a massive disinformation campaign falsely claiming that HIV/AIDS resulted from experiments at US Army's Medical Research Institute for Infectious Diseases, USMRID, at Fort Detrick, Maryland. This false narrative spread globally, damaging international trust, strengthening anti-American sentiments, and exacerbating domestic political controversies in the United States involving LGBTQ+ and immigrant communities. Remarkably, some of these false beliefs persist still today. This longevity demonstrates how devastatingly effective biological disinformation campaigns were and continue to be in our current information environment. Fast forward to today. As mentioned earlier, recent satellite images show significant upgrades to Russia's military biological facility at Sergeyev Posad 6 near Moscow. The timing is striking. These expansions began in May 2022, precisely as Russia intensified its disinformation campaign about biological weapons in Ukraine. In March 2022, in a UN Security Council meeting, Russia specifically requested to discuss of what it called military biological activities in Ukraine, despite lacking credible evidence. The irony? These same Ukrainian facilities have a well-documented history of peaceful international collaborations, including previous partnership with Russia itself through the Non-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. It seems like a classic case of misdirection. By accusing others of developing biological weapons, attention is diverted from Russia's own activities. An effective strategy that creates confusion and undermines trust in international institutions. But compared to the Cold War era, Russia's disinformation tactics have evolved significantly. Here are three major differences between Cold War disinformation campaigns and Russia's contemporary approach. Previously, disinformation would be spread through traditional print media. Now, official diplomatic channels and international organizations are co-opted along with traditional media and social media to spread and legitimize disinformation. As mentioned before, in 2022, Russia managed to use the formal UN Security Council meeting to spread their biological disinformation narratives. Previously, disinformation would quote obscure experts and obscure media outlets. Now, some of the most senior officials in the Russian government deliver disinformation directly at press conferences or on social media. Previously, disinformation would take weeks and months to spread. Now, disinformation is live-streamed and instantaneously shared across global platforms. What once took weeks to spread through obscure publications now travels instantly across social media, and even respected international bodies are used by Russia to legitimize false claims. So what are the key takeaways for understanding biological disinformation and navigating today's complex information environment? Disinformation about biological weapons serves multiple strategic purposes. It misdirects attention from actual activities, creates confusion in the information space, attempts to justify aggressive actions, and undermines trust in international cooperations. In an age of information warfare, understanding these tactics is crucial. By recognizing patterns of disinformation, we can better protect truth in our global discourse. If you want to stay updated on biological disinformation, I highly recommend visiting gpwmdcounterdisinfo.com. This website was created by the Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction, an international initiative supported by G7 countries. It offers regularly updated analysis of disinformation trends, fact-checking resources, and in-depth case studies of historical and contemporary disinformation campaigns. It's my go-to resource for staying up to date on recent developments. If you encounter claims about biological weapons, consider these questions. Who is making the claim? What actual evidence do they provide? Is the claim being made in an emotionally charged context? And most importantly, who benefits from this narrative? As always, thank you so much for watching. Your support means a lot and enables me to create more videos on the darker but critical topics in science. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribe to this channel. If you're not done learning for today about the history of biological weapons, for example, I have just the right video for you to watch next, which I will link here for you. Take care, bye.